Hey, all you feminines out there, this is RJ.
And this is Leigh.
And we are back again to give you another episode of File 741. We apologize again for the mini hiatus. Life is weird, things came up, we're doing our best. So here we are. We decided for this month to talk about how we've been doing in the past and to really kind of go through some of the things that we've really enjoyed most about doing this podcast. This is a passion project for us. We both take time out of our regular jobs and regular schedules to do this because we love to. And so we decided it's a new year. I'm putting in air quotes because, our calendar is arbitrary, but it's the middle of winter. But we are excited to kind of talk about some of the things that we've really enjoyed on this journey that we started in 2018. Was that when we started?
I don't know when File 741 actually started. I know the Feminerds started in 2016.
Yes.
And then as for the podcast itself, I think it was 2018 that we started doing podcasts.
Yeah, I think it was Dink 2018. That was our first episode, which is really exciting, which is almost 4 years ago, which is insane. So, so we've each brought some of the things that we've really enjoyed about this podcast. We've each got a favorite interview that we've done with a comics creator and writer, brought a favorite episode and kind of what that all entails, and then really difficult, but we each chose a favorite comic that we've read throughout the years. We have some runners-up, so bear with us. But Leigh, do you want to start with talking about your favorite interview?
Sure. I would like to take us back to back when we would do in-person interviews. And before we had all these fun things like Google Meets and Zoom and all that kind of stuff, we did an in-person interview with R. Alan Brooks. And that one was kind of fun because we got to do it in the basement of the Mercury Cafe in Denver, which was a fun adventure all on its own because I believe the basement was also the break room for the employees. And so every now and then somebody would just walk in and be like, oh, sorry, I left something in the microwave. Or we were also really close to pipes. And so every time somebody flushed the toilet. So it was highly entertaining, but it was fun being in a different venue. It kind of almost felt like we were professionals then, because I'm like, oh, we're having a professional interview where he does his podcast live and everything like that. So I thought, oh, this is kind of fun. And we were interviewing him on his comic, The Burning Metronome, which is an amazing comic, really deep and really makes you think. And we had what felt like a really deep and introspective conversation with him. And it stuck with me because that was before I had started doing my own comics. It's been a lifelong dream for me to make my own comics. And so I was always so scared, though, because I never thought I could really do it. So I always held myself back and I never even tried because I had already psyched myself out. And he was the person who was like, you know what? Only you can do these things. Just do it. What are you so afraid of? Just do it. Because he had said that he was a writer. He was not a comic book artist, but he decided that he was going to write and both draw his comic. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's a really big endeavor for somebody who doesn't feel that they're really like an artist and everything like that. And his came out amazing. And so I was just so full of questions and inspiration about that and his process. And he really just was like, you just gotta do it, because you can't rely on anybody else to do it for you. You have to just do it. So I kind of took that to heart, and not long after I decided, you know what, I'm gonna do it. And since then I've been making comics and selling them and all kinds of things. And I've been successful in that sense. And I have him to thank for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really amazing to see the progress that he's made since we've interviewed him.
Absolutely.
He's got a Patreon, which I subscribe to with the lowest amount because I'm poor. But, we talk about him, I think, on almost every podcast for the last few episodes because we're just so invested in what he's doing and so excited about what he's bringing. And yeah, I think it's really, really amazing. He talked a lot about too kind of the business side of things, which we don't necessarily hear a lot of all the time, about what it's like to collaborate and having an artist and then it not working out, or having deadlines and things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
so having somebody come in with so much professionalism and knowledge of the industry and to talk with us, like, we're just these humble podcasters that are like just starting out, and we really were just interested in the process. And so he was so kind, and every time we saw him at conventions and stuff, we would say hi.
Mm-hmm.
Just an overall really, really great person. And I think especially with his work and how it deals with race and current events, it's really important. And so I think it's really important to support people like that and to help elevate their voices. So I feel very proud that we were able to do that, and also one of my favorite interviews that we've done.
Yeah, going back on the social justice and things like that, he also was one of our interviewers that or interviewees, I believe, who he made a really cool quote that stuck with me about the sci-fi genre and how like I love sci-fi, and it's interesting how sci-fi, even though it's not really set in a realistic timeline or a realistic universe or things like that, and it seems very fantasy, it does touch upon current events. It does touch upon issues that arise. And the way he framed it, he said, when they were making Star Trek, if you were making a movie or a TV series just about racism in the country at that time, obviously nobody was going to be on board with that and allow that to happen on television. But he said if they framed it in a sci-fi genre where it's, humans and aliens and things like that, then you can still have those very difficult conversations and, portray those situations that are happening in current events. But you're doing it in a sci-fi genre where it doesn't seem as obvious, I guess, but you can still, you're still learning from that. And that's so true about Star Trek. Star Trek really has been so good with teaching about humanity and, ethics and how to I'm trying to frame that in the right way, but either way, I just remember that quote. I thought, oh my gosh, that's so true. In sci-fi, you can kind of mask all that kind of stuff that's actually really happening, but you do it in a way that still discusses the point of these whole situations and, and how to deal with these situations in the most humanistic way, but not doing it so obviously, which I really think is cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could segue into my favorite interview, it's topical because I re-listened to our episode where we interviewed Dylan Edwards, and we talked a lot about Valley of the Silk Sky, which I've been catching up on and is still brilliant. And, we talked about how in a sci-fi setting, you can talk about those things, and you can also talk about them in a way that is like, I'm not quite sure how I want to describe it. Because
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say like post racist, because I think that is so far in the future.
Mm-hmm.
If that happens, like, it's hard for me to imagine. But Dylan is trans, and talking about how he created this comic in which transness is a part of the universe, but it's not like nobody's obsessed with it.
Right.
Nobody cares. Like, the sci-fi element is how do we as a culture make everybody feel comfortable with who they are and how they are, instead of dictating how they should be in society.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, again, that's something that sci-fi and fantasy and even just fiction can do very positively, to really get a chance to talk about things that in some other contexts people would just shut down and not be interested in having that conversation.
It
For that
normalizes
same
it.
Right, for that same reason, Dylan was really interesting to talk to because of his journey of, self-publishing comics, or publishing through zines, or, online things through webcomics, and seeing the journey and the progression of trans artists and trans creators, and how that space has become more open and has expanded throughout the years. You know, we interviewed him in 2019, which again feels like a zillion years ago. But just seeing how things have progressed in some ways and have regressed in some other ways, it was really interesting to kind of go back and talk about some of those things and talk about like politically incorrect and like gay Republicans and like that's something I don't know that I could talk about anymore in the same way. And you know, he brought that up as well. But I've always had a little bit of a crush on him. So full confession, like that's partly why it was one of my favorite interviews because I always loved seeing him at all the conventions and everything. Um, but it was also very influential to me because that was at a time where I didn't quite understand my own transness and my own queerness in such a concrete way. And I mean, it's not concrete. It's something I'm still learning about and is still fluid and is still something that I'm going to continue to learn about myself. But having somebody come in who was so immersed in that and so dedicated to making their art reflect that was just really inspiring. It was really great to hear too about, you know, the same thing with Alan Brooks, like just sticking with it and just saying like, I don't know if this is going to get published. I don't know if I'm going to get paid for this, but I'm going to do it because this is what I do. And then being able to find a venue to display those things because you keep trying. And, you know, it really reminds me of the things that you've been doing, Leigh, as well, because it's like, well, if I hadn't done this, I wouldn't have gotten published here. And if I hadn't gotten published here, I wouldn't have thought to reach out to this other group. And if that other group hadn't published my thing, then I wouldn't be where I am today. So, you know, just persevering and really understanding the purpose of what you're doing, rather than just saying, well, there's this amount of queer art, or what do I have to say that hasn't been said before? Like, we're all unique individuals that have our own creative and unique understanding of the world, and that is valid. And to see that reflected in that art and in comics specifically, and a medium that you and I both love, but that I also feel like is so important, especially for young readers, it's just really cool. So yeah, I had a really good time. We also did that interview in person at a library. You know, and some of our interviews, of course, have been virtual, just because of, you know, logistics where people are living and scheduling and all of that. Because I think we were going to try to meet Mariah Hummer in person too, and we ended up doing it over video or over phone, which I think was like absolutely bonkers the way we managed to like do that
way before that kind of stuff, technology was a thing.
Yeah.
Speaking of Mariah Hummer, that's my backup, my favorite interview as well. Also fully admitting that I've got a teeny tiny crush on her as well. Very much enjoy running into her at cons and at derby bouts, both things that seem like forever ago were a thing. But yeah, Mariah Hummer, her comic is Flat Track Furies, and it's a roller derby comic. And what I've drawn with her art is that I just love her style. She makes these really beautiful female characters that, you know, are curvy, and they each have such different personalities, and the detail for each of them is just really cool to see. They're very diverse, and I think it's just amazing how good of an artist she is. Like, her artwork is stellar, and it's definitely something that I strive to be. But I also love that her comic is a monotone comic, so it's all black and white, but then she highlights it with one color, and she chooses pink. And I also enjoy that that's like a Take Back Pink, you know, type thing that she was doing, is because, you know, we the world has been conditioned to think that Pink is princess and, you know, not to be taken very seriously and girly and this and that. And her characters are so badass and tough. And she was like, you know, I'm taking back Pink, you know, and I was like, good for you, man. And so, yeah, no, I really, really enjoy her comics. She's only had a few. I know, you know, her job is very busy. So she, you know, hasn't really had a lot of time to make more comics, although I should check and see if she's got any more for sale. I definitely would love to have some more editions of those. But yeah, no, her art is just really stellar. She's very, very good at drawing the human figure and giving them such life and personality. So, one of my favorites, very much enjoy running into her. She also drives a really, really cool purple motorcycle that I'm also equally have a crush on.
Yeah, right? So cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it was really hard to kind of look through the people that we've talked to and kind of pick our favorites. You know, this is something we also mentioned when we were talking to Dylan, in that everybody has such a different method and a different perspective and a different way of coming to their art. You know, I was thinking about when we interviewed Kaiju, when we talked about Nove, and how at the start they each drew their individual characters and then like put them together in this world. And I was like, that's so wild, like to have them fit so perfectly together. And then, you know, the people who are doing Kamikaze or, you know, Afar. And it's just so cool to see. And it's been very, very cool for us to be able to talk to these people about their methods and their inspirations and their ideas, and to hear about that stuff. I just really nerd out about how people create things. And so it's been really, really cool.
Yeah, I was thinking about Nove as well for that same reason, because that, of all the people that we talked to when they're speaking about their process, I just thought that was mind-boggling that they each work on their own character and storylines separately and then meet together and try and merge it into something. I was like, wow. I always assume that there's one person who's the artist and there's one person who's the writer, you know, and they collaborate in that sense. So the fact that they're each individually doing all the things and then working together. And then I think they also are really big on setting. So sometimes even before they start writing on the story or the characters, they're making these really elaborate backgrounds for the settings and doing all this intricate study of the places that they are creating. I think they were choosing, I can't really remember all the settings, but I remember something that they were showing, I think it was Italy, that they were picking places from. And I just thought, oh my goodness, the detail orientation of that comic is just fascinating to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So moving on just a little bit, you know, we've done quite a few episodes. I mean, over the years, we're trying to be consistent, but we aren't always. So we don't have that many episodes. But, Leigh, did you have kind of a favorite episode in general? I think that, not that our earlier stuff was bad, but I think we really found our stride when we started talking about things in terms of theme, rather than just picking like one comic to talk about at a time. And, you know, we talked about like Giant Days or Rat Queens, where we talked about kind of the longer run of that comic, which did give us some interesting ways to kind of delve really into how things had changed and the overarching kind of stories and character arcs. But once we kind of switched gears and started talking about things by theme and said, okay, we're going to talk about comics that take place in space, or we're going to talk about comics that are about Native American and indigenous people. Like, I think that's where we really started to be able to talk about how we see those things represented in different form. And so I definitely have a favorite episode kind of combining those things, but what about you?
I really enjoyed our time travel episode. That was my favorite. I am a big time travel fan. I don't TV, movies, comics, books. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's got time travel in it, I'm probably interested. And I'm not really sure why that is. I was also a big Highlander fan, and I loved all the years of history that he lived through in his 400 years. So it must just be I like having characters that don't feel limited by their lifetime in a particular time period, that they get to actually span, like Outlander and things like that, you know, where it's more than one time period. I find that fascinating. So we did a comic about time travel, and we included a bunch of different comics, and I liked most of them except for one. But the ones that really spoke to me were Louisa, The Infinite Loop, We Can Fix It, and then I had tacked on Seconds at the very end of that one. And each one of them spoke to me in a very similar but yet different way. I really feel like the conversation we had during that was really poignant. You know, I at the time was turning 40 and was really, you know, looking back at my life and thinking, oh my God, you know, it's 40 just always seemed so far away to me, and now here I am, and Louisa especially covers that, you know, my young self and my current self meeting, and, you know, seeing how different you were as a child and how different you are as an adult, and what that would be like meeting with your past self and with your future self in the same storyline. And so, yeah, it really just, for me, it was a lot of reflection of my life and where I was feeling at the time. And I just, yeah, I don't know. It was a little therapeutic for me. So I very much enjoyed that episode. I think there was a lot of good points made and stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. Louisa was a gorgeous comic too.
It was,
just
yeah.
The way that it was set up, it really stood out to me, especially at the end when things were kind of converging. That was a really, really great one. And we did answer a very important question, and We Can Fix It, in that would you make out with yourself if you went back and forward in time? And I think we both said no, but you know, these are the important questions.
Yeah. I'm gonna go with absolutely not on that.
But no, I agree. I think those were all really interesting comics, and I think, yeah, we did have some really interesting discussions about the nature of history, and if you could go back in time, you know, would you try and fix something, but how does that affect something else? And you know, in almost all of these stories, something goes wrong because someone's trying to do something. And so then you kind of talk about the inevitability of things. But yeah, it's just a super interesting topic. So yeah, that was a really fun episode for sure.
Yes, I agree.
Kind of along the same lines, the episode that really, really stood out to me and kind of stuck with me was we did a bonus episode called Ghosts. That was just kind of like a fall post-Halloween fun little episode that we did because we had all these comics about ghosts that we really wanted to talk about. So we talked about Sheets, Ghosts by Raina Telgemeier, Archival Quality, and Anya's Ghost. And these are all comics that I just love so much. I mean, especially Sheets. Brenna Thumler wrote a sequel called Delicates, which is somehow even more beautiful and poignant, and the story just reaches an additional level that is just so incredibly moving that it's just so amazing. And then Archival Quality, of course, was one of my favorites in terms of style and story, and Ghosts, of course, Raina Telgemeier, it's hard to go wrong with her. And then, of course, Anya's Ghost, another one of my favorites, just because of the really interesting kind of twist that it takes, and the journey it takes both the character on and you as a reader on. So, and it's really interesting because I spend a lot of time thinking about life in general. I don't know, like, you know, I'm a thinker, so I like to just think and, you know, think about the universe and our place in it, and is humanity worth saving, and all of these, you know, very important philosophical questions that I don't expect I'll ever have an answer to. But afterlife is something that I'm always thinking about, because I grew up Mormon, so I was taught, that everybody goes to heaven unless you're like really, really terrible. Then you are banished to the outer darkness. But there's like three tiers of heaven, but you can only go to the top tier if you're like Mormon and married in the temple, and you're heterosexual and have kids and whatever. And that's where God is. But God visits the other people in the other levels of heaven. So I remember having kind of a huge breakdown when I thought that that might be true, and I wasn't sure why. And I think it's because to me that limits so many things about being a human. There's religion has a really interesting way of being like, well, the best thing that you can do, your reward for being a good person, is to just be in a beautiful place singing praises to God all the time. And that sounds super boring. So, like, I really love Mary Roach as an author, and her book, Spooked, has a really good exploration of, like, we don't really have any definitive evidence either for an afterlife or against. Like, there are people that I believe have had some sort of experience. Is that your brain? Is that something real? Is that, the universe, we have some continuation of energy? I don't know. But I love to see comics really explore that, and to see the different ways that people talk about death and grief, and whether or not there are some form of our loved ones that we can still connect to. I really like that. I think it's really cool. I think it's really interesting. And I really appreciate people that are willing to speculate on that in such an amazing form.
I agree. I really liked the Ghost podcast as well. I like any of our ones that are Halloween based. Those are always the ones that I'm so sorry my cat she just woke up. She was fine this entire time.
Ugh, mine finally went to sleep. So, he's in his cube.
So yeah, anytime we do a Halloween one, those are always the ones that I look forward to. Halloween's my favorite holiday, and I don't know, there's just something about, we seem to find really either cute or spooky or just adorable ones sometimes. I'm thinking of like Pumpkinheads, like the fall one that we did. One of my very favorite comics, which I was going to put as my favorite comic for this, was Fangs by Sarah Anderson, who does Sarah Scribbles. I don't know what it is about her, but no one seems to get me better than Sarah Anderson with her comics.
She's so amazing.
Oh my God. Like, she just touches on things and I'm like, oh, I thought that was just me. She's really, really fantastic at that. Sarah Scribbles, like, gets me all the time. And then Fangs, even though, like I said, I'm queer and I'm not sure how she identifies, I don't want to assume straight, but, that seems to be in her comic, and in her in Fangs and in Sarah Scribbles, seems to be that her character of herself is with a male counterpart usually. And so in Fangs, even though, like I said, I'm not straight, I totally felt that comic, and I really appreciated it was a love story between a vampire and a werewolf, which, we all know from Twilight, you don't mix those two. And Underworld, I guess that's another one. I don't know why they don't mix, but that seems to be in the sci-fi genre, not a no-go. And so for some reason, though, these two characters really seemed to fit, and they each have their own little monster quirks that the other has to get used to, but it's done in such a cute way. And even when there were serious times where they were actually fighting in the comic, relationship fighting, not like underworld fighting, but it was like a normal relationship where you say things you don't mean and you do things you don't mean, and then afterwards you feel terrible and you apologize and remind that person that you love them. And it just, it was so sweet. By the end of it, I just was like a little teary-eyed. It was just very, very sweet. And you wouldn't think that in a vampire werewolf comic that would touch you in the feels as much as it did, but it did. And that's another perfect example of somebody who has a really simplistic style, black and white, ink usually. Like I said, Sarah Scribbles is very simple. Usually just a 6-panel. very, very monotone, black and white, easy to draw type thing. And then Fangs has a little bit more detail, but still black and white, and not a lot of color or detail in the backgrounds and things like that. But even for things that are this simple, they're beautiful. And I would buy them as a panel and hang it up in my house. So like I said, simplicity does not mean that it's a lesser comic in any way. This is a perfect example of somebody who chooses a simpler style, but still brings it every single time.
Yeah, I think in general, we may have talked about this before, probably. I tend to prefer a more simplistic style. I'm thinking back on some of the like Marvel comics I've read that or DC that I haven't really gotten into because it doesn't leave really anything to the imagination, I like media that gives me a hint of something that I can then kind of fill in, and even if those details are there, it allows the story to come out more fully when there's not all these explosions and things kind of distracting you from that story.
Right.
But yeah, I really, really love Sarah Anderson, and yeah, Fangs was really great and really fun. And yeah, I think our Halloween episodes are fun because it really lets us delve into like our witchy pagan side. Yeah. Or maybe it's not a side, maybe it's like all of us. But,
yeah. I've gotten into collecting tarot cards since we've been doing these things, because that's sometimes a background feature in some of these comics. And that's my next goal of a project I want to do is I want to create my own deck. And I want it to be in kind of a simplistic comic style, so that's kind of what I'm going for. Snapdragon was another really great Halloween one that we just did that I was like, oh, this is so beautiful. So some of the Halloween ones are some of the most gorgeous stories that we get to read.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Snapdragon was definitely on my list of potential favorites. It was really hard for me to narrow them down, but yeah, definitely that was very, very high on the list. Also really high on the list was newsprints. When we did our episode about like kids comics, like comics that are specifically written graphic novels for kids, that story is just, again, one of those things where like there's a lot of detail to that story, but it kind of throws you into this world and you just kind of go along with it. But like you have this character who is gender queer in some way, this beautiful relationship with this robot kid, like really interesting kind of political stuff going on, but seen from the perspective of this child and this person who's like just trying to survive and wants to do the right thing. That was also one of my favorites. But yeah, so I think after much consternation, I decided that I think one of my favorite comics that we've talked about is Bitch Planet. Partly because I do have tattoos that were directly inspired by the comics. So I have the N and the C tattooed on my middle fingers for non-conforming, and I haven't really gotten to use them the way I intended, but they're still really cool. I just love finger tattoos. I just think they're very cool. But that comic, because I have the tattoos, I talk about it a lot with people. They'll say, "Oh, what are your tattoos?" And I'll say, "Oh yeah, it's from this comic, and it's about this jail sort of thing that is this space station that's orbiting Earth, and because the people who are sent there are typically like Black and brown women or trans people or people who are non-conforming, it's colloquially known as Bitch Planet, and it in some instances has opened up some really interesting conversations about our society as it is and our kind of expectations in a patriarchal cishet white capitalist society, all of the things that I don't like or want in my life. So it kind of encapsulates a lot of what I stand for, like as a person, politically, idealistically. And it also, of course, Esty was on the podcast with us, so that was really fun. It's always great to have guests, and she's always such a wonderful addition to the podcast.
Agreed.
But yeah, I think it was really influential in terms of what the scope of the things we're talking about is, and like what we're not afraid to shy away from, and the things that we're interested in as people, but also how do we use art to make the world a better place. And I think that Bitch Planet really represents that in a really thorough way. It's also, I mean, it's just a great story, really great art. It's sci-fi, so it checks that box. Queer. It's really, really incredible, and everybody should read it, obviously. But yeah, it's a good time, and also a little bit of a pat on the back for me. I also really enjoyed that episode because I did the fake advertisements for that one, where I took the ads from the actual comic that they had created and made these little like radio ads, and I was super proud of how those turned out, and it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, I would like to add as a backup one that was a favorite of mine was Bandette. I still really love Bandette. It's a French comic, and it's, I don't know, playful and fun. Does kind of have a semi-serious plot, but it's done in such a cute way. I think if I were going to play a superhero in my life, I would be very much like Bandette, with her dog Papito, and the chocolate bars when she's apologizing to people, throwing chocolate bars at them, and no, she was just great. She was I actually made that as a cosplay, and I'm not the type of person that wears dresses or anything like that, but I did it anyway because I just really enjoyed Bandette, and so I have a really great cosplay for that with the nice little red wig and the little mask and everything. And Bandette's one of my very favorites now as a character to cosplay. I also enjoyed the artwork in that because it was also not super detailed. It really reminded me of my childhood picture books, because it was done in such a ink and watercolor, simple watercolor type way. I feel like a lot of comics or not comics, but picture books from like the 70s or 80s were done in that kind of style. And it also felt very French. It felt like, what was that book when we were kids?
I always compare it to Tintin.
Yeah, Tintin.
Which is what, Swedish?
Yeah, but I mean, the art style kind of reminded me of, what's that one, the French one with the girls with the little yellow dresses and the nun?
Oh, Madeline.
Madeline. Yeah, Madeline. It has that kind of a feel too. I don't know. It just, it kind of brought me back to my childhood there because that was a very common way of doing art in books back then. So a lot of my favorite books had that kind of style. So
I had a little Madeline like box set. So it came in like a little thing with a little handle, and then it had like 4 of the Madeline books in it.
Yeah.
Good books.
Yeah.
Ooh, she always said. Well, Leigh, it's always so great to talk to you, always. But it's also especially great to talk to you about comics because it's something that, we're both really passionate about and we both love a lot. And doing this retrospective, like looking back on how far we've come, not only just in like our own personal projects, although you have done more than I have, but as podcasters and as people who are interested in looking and thinking about things critically and understanding how comics and graphic novels can have such a positive impact on education and on, real life things that people sometimes don't really know how to get into or address in a way that they feel comfortable with. Here's a really, really good way for people to have a way to learn about something without feeling like you're learning something.
Right.
And so, I really love what we're doing. I'm really glad that we could take the time to look back and see what we've done. And I'm really excited for the future.
Me too. It's something that I look forward to doing each month, when we can do it each month. Last few months have been tough, folks. I'm sorry this pandemic has hit us hard, but we're doing the best that we can. We're hypothetically putting out each month as best we can. But I am glad
we talk about it each month.
Yes, we do. We even put it in the calendar until something happens.
We do.
But that's okay. Like I said, as long as we don't give up and we keep on going, is pretty much the motto for everybody now. Get to it when you can. And we have, and I've really appreciated that. I'm glad that this hasn't gone by the wayside now that we live in different states and cities and have different lives, different jobs, different schedules, things like that. We've kept it going, and that's something that I really appreciate and thank you for.
Thank you.
All righty.
Okay, I don't have anything else to say.
I do not either. We've retrospected the hell out of this.
We surely did.
All right. Shall we wrap it up from here?
Let's wrap it up.
Okay. This has been another exciting episode of File 741. I'm Leigh.
And I'm RJ.
Thank you for listening, and please like us on Facebook or follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You can tune in to all of our podcasts on iTunes, Podbean, YouTube, or at thefeminerdfiles.net, or anywhere else that you get a podcast for that matter, seeing as you can kind of do that everywhere. Okay.
Yep. Hurrah for the internet.
Yay. And we're out.
And we're done.